Welcome to this session. In this session, what I'm trying to discuss is issues pertaining to policies. So, an organization tend to have a number of policies. So, we want to understand the different policies that your organization can have, and also at the same time why it is important for organizations to have policies. Number one, what we need to appreciate is policies are very, very important to each and every organization because they inform decisions. Decisions are mostly based on policies, but also they ensure uniformity of decisions to ensure whatever your decision you have made is you're not favoring anyone. You are making the same decisions. There is consistency when you're making the decisions so that they are able to apply to all your employees or your clients. And also at the same time, policies are very, very important because they bring unity of doing things, because everybody does things in the same way. So these are some of the things we should be able to appreciate the importance of having policies within an organization. So each and every organization should have policies, different policies. And the policies, 80% of them, could be even 90%. Majority of the policies tend to come from different laws which are there. You might have different laws, but now you can have different laws, but you cannot follow the law to the latter in terms of you can now have, because the law tend to provide the minimum. So within a policy, you can now provide the specifics to say, maybe, I'll give an example. A policy, a law would provide to say, maybe employers should allow their employees to go on maternity leave, for example, yeah, and the maternity leave could be for 2 months, but we have seen other organizations providing maternity leave for up to 3 months, other 6 months. So the law can just provide the minimum standards. A policy on pension, for example, you can have a policy on pension, and you can have to say, okay, pension is 10%. Employer has to contribute a minimum of 10%, but there are cases where some employers can provide for more than 10%. So the law provides the minimum. That's what we should be able to appreciate. So it's up to you to adopt the minimum, or you can provide more than that. And also there are other issues which are not in the law. So the policy will be able to articulate such kind of issues to say, how do you manage this kind of issues in the absence of the law? So this will be regarded as best practices. So it's very, very important. And each and every organization, when it is being established, it needs to have some kind of policies for decision making, because the decisions should be based on the policy that you have as an organization to bring uniformity when you are making your decisions. So one thing we should be able to appreciate, each and every organization tend to have, when it is being established, it follows certain laws. So I'll give an example. You might have a public organization, you might have an act of parliament. Yeah, you might have an NGO which has to follow a certain act of parliament in terms of their activities. For example, if you are an NGO and you're intervening in the HIV space, you might find that there's HIV's policy or act of parliament. So this is some of the things which I'm trying to say. Each and every organization tend to follow certain policies. So what we need to appreciate is the various acts of parliament, including the constitution, could be a guide to the development of the policies. If you are developing your gender policy, for example, you need to look at to say, what does the law on gender say? On HIV, if you develop a policy on HIV, you need to think of yourself, what does the law on HIV say? So whatever you are doing, you should be doing them in light of those acts of parliament which are there. So let's come now to the real issues to say, what are some of the policies and organizations tend to have. The first policy that an each and every organization should have is the strategic plan. And the strategic plan would have the vision, the mission, and also the objectives that the organization has to achieve. So this will also come from maybe the Act of Parliament that established that organization. If it's a public organization, if it's an NGO, could be coming from a certain kind of an agreement that was made between this NGO and maybe with the donors, for example. Yeah. If it's a private company, a strategic plan would be coming from the managing director of the company to say what is it that he wants to achieve by a certain number of years. So the strategic plan is a first policy which is very, very important. Each and every organization has to have. So I was saying, policies have to be developed or have to be reviewed. So when you are reviewing or developing the policies, think of Change Consult Group. Change Consult Group can be able to support you in one way or another in terms of development and review of the different policies that you have or you need to have within your organization. So as I was saying, you can have the strategic plan. So you have the mission, the vision, the objectives, the kind of strategies that you want to undertake in each and every year, maybe for a space of 5 years, could be 6 years, could be 4 years. Yeah. And you can have the key performance indicators for each and every department. What is the role of each and every department for you to achieve the mission of the organization? What strategies are you going to follow, and what are the KPIs for each and every department? After you have done your SWOT analysis, you have done your PESTELO analysis, you are looking at the whole thing to say, how do we arrive at these issues pertaining to the challenges that the organization has? So how do we meander and also taking advantage of the opportunities and the strengths we have, at the same time mitigating the threats and the weaknesses? That's what is very, very important for us to appreciate. So when you have got the strategic plan, it's one of the key tools that you need to have for you to succeed as an organization. And you may need to review maybe every 2 years to say, are we doing what we had agreed to be doing? Because it's an agreement to say this is what, and some organizations, CEOs, their performance will be based on how they have effectively implemented the strategic plan. We had agreed that in the first year you should be able to do A, B, C, D. Have you done these things? If you don't get it, you are fired. So these are some of the things which are very, very important. And another tool, which is also very, very important, or a policy that has to be developed, is the terms and conditions of service. So the terms and conditions of service will act as a guide of the relationship between the employer and the employee, to guide them on how they should be able to manage the relationship. So it will contain maybe the recruitment procedures, it will contain the training procedures, it will contain how promotions have to be handled, how leave days have to be, who is entitled to how much leave days, how dismissals have to be handled, disciplinary process of how they should be, loans, how do we manage loans, are we providing loans, what kind of loans are we providing to the employees, issues of occupational safety and health, for example, and among other things, could be maternity leave, and a number of things, or hours of working within the organization, who reports to who, and how do we manage issues of promotions, conflict management, HIV/AIDS, among other things. But when you have the terms and conditions of service, this is acting as a Bible for the organization. It's looking at the relationship between the organization and the employee, because the Bible looks at the relationship between you as an individual and God. Yeah, so you can have like a pastor who is like a CEO, but it's about you and the employer, and your employer is the organization. So what I'm trying to say is, these terms and conditions of service are very, very important, because they are guiding the relationship. If you don't perform, you can be fired because you're not performing. If the organization is not supporting you with the necessary obligations that is supposed to provide to you, then you can also resign, for example, or you can complain. But it forms the basis. So even the courts can use to say, okay, in the terms and conditions of service, you said you'll be providing to this employee these things, but you're not providing. So the employee has got the right to sue you. Or maybe you have handled this thing in this way, but the terms and conditions of service is saying this. So that's why the terms and conditions of service have to be developed or reviewed by people who are knowledgeable. There could be changes in the law. Yeah, like we saw the change in the issues of the flexible hours for people who are on maternity leave, for example. Yeah, or for lactating mothers, for example. flexible working hours issue, people provide. Issues of paternity leave, they are new, they came in 2021. Strike, if you go for strike for more than 3 days, no pay. But now, do we have these things in our terms and conditions of service? So it's so important to review our terms and conditions. So they should be speaking to these laws which are there. So the terms and conditions of service is very, very key for you as a tool which is going to guide you, the relationship between you and the employer, or between you as an employer and the employees. Very, very important. And another aspect which is also very, very important in the terms and conditions of service, which we need to appreciate, is to say that other policies can also be developed based on the term, because the terms and conditions cannot be encompassing everything, but there are other things which have to be developed in addition to the terms and conditions. But these policies can be based on the terms. Certain issues can be more elaborated through different policies. In the policy, in the terms and conditions, you can have issues of safety, but you might need to have a safety policy. You might have an issue related to HIV, but you might need to have a specific policy for HIV. So these are some of the things which are very, very important for us to appreciate. Now, let's look at some of the policies that you can also develop as an organization, or consultants as ourselves can help you to develop for your organization. One, you might need to develop recruitment policy, because in the terms and conditions, you might not be detailed. For example, in the recruitment policy, you might look to say, how do you create a vacancy? How do you advertise that particular vacancy? Who develops the job descriptions for that vacancy? How do you confirm to say how many people are supposed to be recruited, for example? Yeah, you have done your functional review, which you can also able to help you to do the functional reviews. But if you have done, for example, the recruitment, if you have to do the recruitment, how long should you advertise? What platforms can you use for advertising? How long from the time you advertise to the time you shortlist? Shortlisting, who should do shortlist? How long should the shortlisting be done? After that, interviews, who should be on the panel? What kind of interview questions would be asking? How do you come up with the interview score sheet? After that, you should be looking at to say also issues of reference checks. How do you check on references? Whom do you contact for references? Police checks and other things, confirmation of our appointment, induction, orientation. So that can be in the recruitment policy. If it is in the terms and conditions, it could be too broad, but you can have a specific policy on recruitment. Training could be another policy. Who is responsible for identification of training needs? How is training related to performance management? Does our organization support long-term trainings, short-term trainings? Under what circumstances is supposed? What about if someone is studying on his own? Should the organization be able to refund or not? So this will be contained in the specific policy regarding the training. So each and everybody will be able to know, for me to qualify for training, I have to do. What about people if they want to study abroad under a scholarship? What should the organization do? So these are some of the things which are very, very important for us to appreciate, to say, need to have a training policy. Strong one. Training bonds. How do we manage training bonds? We have supported an employee. Yes. How long is he supposed to work for the organization before we say no? Whatever we have paid for you, you have settled everything. Issues of occupational safety and health welfare. What are some of the safety risks within the organization, health risks within what welfare interventions can we do within the organizations? So these welfare policies, occupational safety, health policies we need to have within the organization. What are some of the risks within the organizations? What happens if an employee is injured? How do we compensate the employees? How do we mitigate against the safety and health risks? So these are some of the things which are, in terms of the welfare, how are we going to take care of the employees in terms of do we provide confidence? Do we support? What kind of support can we provide to the employees? When we talk about health and safety and welfare, we're talking about do we need to have aerobics, for example, gymnastics, issues of How do you handle people with diabetes, hypertension? We need to have lessons to teach people on how to control hypertension. Change Consult Group can help you in all those areas. How do we manage the lifestyle diseases, for example? Yeah, BP and other things. So how do we manage all those things as an organization? Issues of performance management. You can have a specific policy on performance management. How do you develop the KPIs? How do we rate an employee and how do they appraise each other? What kind of tools can you use for a performance appraisal? Which are the best tools you can use for performance appraisal? How do you handle issues of where there are differences between the appraiser and the appraisee? They're not agreeing on one thing. How do you handle such kind of what is the role of a performance appraisal committee? What's the role of the CEO? What's the role of head of department? What's the role of a supervisor? What's the role of an employee within the performance management system? How does performance link to discipline and maybe the grievance handling? How does performance link to rewards? What kind of rewards should be provided to employees? Is it to do with salary increment or bonuses? And what? How do we provide such kind of things? How does it relate to the organizational structure and also the salary structure? Because sometimes there are some salary increments which can be able to affect the salary structure. So how do we manage that? Is it a once-off thing, or you need to provide the notches? What about if someone is performing but is at a bar, at the last notch on the salary grade? Issues of discipline. How do we manage discipline within this organization? We should have a policy. Do we need to suspend? Under what circumstances are we supposed to suspend the employees? How do we carry out investigations, for example? How do we carry out a disciplinary hearing? Who should be on a disciplinary hearing? Who should chair disciplinary hearings? Is a disciplinary hearing a committee that is there full time, or we have to have it as an ad hoc committee, for example? Is there the right to appeal, for example? Can employees appeal to the disciplinary process? How long can an employee sue the organization whilst working for the organization? So these are some of the things we should be able to handle as an organization. What about if an employee has sued us because maybe we had dismissed him? How do we handle such kind of things? All those things should be in the disciplinary policy. How do we handle grievances? We should have a grievance policy, for example. So as Change Consult Group, we can be able to support you to develop such kind of policy. And now, other people tend to call about the HR handbook. The HR handbook now would have all these now policies into one. These different policies. So you can call that one as an HR handbook. Issues of HIV/AIDS. Yeah. 95. 95% of employees should be tested. 95% should be on ARVs. Yeah, and 95% should be adhering. They should have their thyroid suppressed. So all these things, how do we mitigate that? How do we manage that to ensure that there is 95 at the workplace? What kind of mechanisms are we supporting our employees to achieve the 95? Issues of AMCT, elimination of mother to child transmission. What kind of messages can we share to our employees, for example? Who is responsible for sharing HIV and AIDS information, for example? This is an issue of health-related issues. Yeah. How do we manage confidentiality of HIV status? How do we manage discrimination? Because no one should be discriminated because of his HIV. What kind of support can the organization provide to the employees to support them? Maybe nutrition support. What kind of support should be provided to those people who have declared to be HIV positive, for example? So these are some of the things which are very, very key within the organization. How do we handle issues of employees being on prolonged illness versus whereby maybe the terms and conditions is talking about an employee when he has worked for if he is sick maybe for sick leave, if he is sick for maybe 2 months or more, then he should be on unpaid leave. So how do we handle that when someone is HIV positive, for example? Yeah, if someone is communicating, removing the confidentiality from someone to say, no, Mr. So-so-so, Mr. So-so-so, Mrs. So-so is HIV positive to other people. How do we handle that? He has broken the issues of confidentiality. So we look at that, we develop the policy in light of the HIV/AIDS Prevention and Management Act. What does the Act say? What does the HIV national policy say? So these are some of the things which are very, very important. Issues of gender. How do we achieve the 40-60 within the organization? Yeah. How do we promote to ensure that male are provided for positions within the organization? So these are some of the very, very important issues which are have to be handled within the organization, which we should be able to be appreciative. How do we ensure that positions are filled by men? For these positions are filled, we are bringing the gender balance within the organizations. How do we handle promotion? We can have a promotion policy, for example. Yeah. You have a promotion, how do we handle promotion? Are we basing on performance? If someone has gone for training, should we promote that particular person? Safeguarding issues, yeah, under occupation safety, even HIV/AIDS, issues of safeguarding, issues of safeguarding are very, very important nowadays. Yeah, how do they safeguard people from the dangers within the organization, harassment and other things? If someone is harassing another person, how do we safeguard that particular employee? Issues of internship, for example. What kind of policy can we have on internship? It's not by law. Are we supposed to pay precautions, for example, yeah, for interns? So these are some of the policies which you need to have as an organization. Very, very important. You look at issues of audit. Yeah, issues of audit are very, very important. You can have a policy on audit. How do we manage audits within the organization? What are the risks within the organization? Which are there? How can we manage the risks? Issues of procurement and disposal, for example. How do we manage issues of procurement? How do we procure? Are we going to use RFQs? Are we going to use bids? Are we going to qualify our suppliers? Yeah. Are we going to have framework agreements? Yeah. How do we buy goods, services, non-consultancy services, consultancy services, works, among other things? How do we do such kind of procurement? What methods can we use? What does the law say? Maybe if you're in the public sector, there's a Public Procurement Act, for example. How do we follow that? If we are in the NGO, it could be donors. What are the regulations of procurement for the donors, for example? So each and every donor can have a policy on how you manage procurements, for example. Yeah? How do we dispose our assets? Can employees buy the assets from, if they are within the organization? So these are some of the important things we should be able to manage within the under the asset. How do we donate our assets to other organizations? So we can have a policy on procurement and disposal. Stores, yeah. How do we manage our stores? How do we receive goods? How do we keep them within the stores? How do we issue the issues to outside? How do we handle broken items or damaged items or expired products? And what consequences if people in the stores are letting things to expire? What should we do? Finance manuals. We can have finance manuals, financial policies. How do we manage our creditors, our debtors, and so many other things. Communication strategy. We have a communication strategy on how do we communicate. Who should be responsible for communication in light of the Access to Information Act? How do we handle our communications? ICT policy. How do we handle issues related to ICT? As I said, Change Consulting Group can help you to review or develop all these policies. Who can have access to the computer? Who can have access to internet? Who can have access to this kind of information? Intranet. How do we have access to the internet? How do we send our emails? Yeah. How do we back up our information for the organization? So these are some of the important things we should be able to know. How do we handle the servers? Yeah. All those you can have them within your organization as a policy in the ICT policy. Who has rights to this? Who are the administrators? Who are the users? And all that. You can have all that within your organization. Induction policy. How do we conduct our induction? Yes, you can have a policy on induction, orientation. How do we induct our employees? You can have a systematic policy to say this is what is supposed to be. Technical people have to train them. The HR people have to train them. And how do we do it? Is it for 1 week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks? And you need to have a clear program when you are going to do that. Transport policy. How do we manage our transport or our fleet? How do you fuel your vehicles? Do we need to have trackers in our vehicles? Do we need to have vehicle trackers? Do we need to have buttons for ignition? Yeah, for example. Yeah. So you need to manage. Do we carry passengers, outside passengers who are not our employees, for example? Yeah. So you can have a policy on that to say, these are some of the things: the mileages, service. How soon can we service a vehicle, for example? Yeah. How do we dispose of motor vehicles, for example? You can have the asset management policy. How do we manage our assets? When to dispose, when to procure, how to maintain our assets? Would we have the asset register, for example? Who manages these assets, for example? Do we have an asset inventory in the offices? So this could be documented in a policy. You can have the records management policy. How do we manage our records? Both electronic and the manual records. Who has access to which records? When to have access to such kind of records? It could be electronic, it could be manual. So why it is important for us to appreciate, do we have the filing index? We can help you to develop a filing index. How do you file your documentation within your organization, for example? Yeah, with proper file numbers and also clearly labeled, so that all your items, once you want something, I'm looking for, we bought a fridge, but I can't trace that kind of, I'm looking for a contract for security. You know, there's a file for security, there's a file for cleaning, there is a file for transport, there is a file for medical aid, there is a file for pension, there is a file for different projects. You should have specific files. There's a file for public relations. There's a file for, even within public relations, you can have a file for advertisements, a file for press releases. So, you know, whenever you have got press releases, you have a file specific. This could be an electronic file or a manual file. So we can support you how to develop the electronic filing, but also at the same time, the manual filing. Issues of disability, for example. How do we manage disabilities at the workplace? How do we manage, how do we build our buildings in light of the disability policy, for example, or the Disability Act, for example? So these are some of the important policies which an organization has to develop or review within its establishment. And now, after development is one, but implementation is what is key. How do we implement? All the employees have to be oriented on these policies. They have to know what is supposed, and even each and every employee has to sign. Could be code of ethics, corruption and prevention policy, for example. You can have a policy on corruption and prevention. Each and every employee should be signing that kind of code of ethics, conflict of interest policy. You can have a policy on conflict of interest, for example. So these policies are very, very important, which are going to guide your organization in terms of how it manages things within the organization. But what is key? All these could be coming from the strategic plan. Because the strategic plan could be defining how you're going to mitigate the environment for you to achieve what is supposed to be achieved by the end of the period you have agreed in the strategic plan. And you are saying, no, we have achieved what we wanted to achieve. And we have been able to achieve this because of the strategic plan and also these other policies. I'll give an example. The performance policy could be related to the strategic plan to say, if you have failed to do this, then you can be fired. Yes. Disciplinary hearing based on performance. Possible. You can fire someone. Why should you keep a dead wood within your organization? So that's what is very, very important for us to appreciate, to say, when you want to think of developing or review of policies within your organization, think Change Consult Group. At CCG, at Change Consult, ccg@changeconzert.org. ccg@changeconzert.org. You're going to appreciate. Thank you.